There's a secret language in higher ed. It's matriculate, bursar, registrar, verification. All of those are just baked into our system. And we just forget they're not normal, but they might as well just be in a different language for some families.
43% of our students are first generation. Their parents haven't done this before. And we need to use plain language that we use in conversation every day.
Picture this. A student gets an email from your admissions office. It tells them to submit their deposit, activate their portal, and review their award letter. So it sounds straightforward if you've done this before or if you work in higher ed. But if not, you might be thinking, what's a deposit? What's a portal? Is the aid letter the same thing as my financial aid? And if a student feels confused, chances are they'll freeze. And that moment of confusion can become a missed opportunity and a lost bit of trust. Today's guests are on a mission to fix situations just like that. Laura Rudolph is the founder of Square One Consulting, and Kristin Nichols is Chief Marketing Officer at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. They've seen how even the most well-meaning messages can create friction and how small changes in language can open big doors. Welcome, Laura and Kristin.
Great
Thanks
to be
for
here.
having me.
So this is where I want to start. Since I just gave an example, what's a word or phrase that we use all the time in higher ed that students really don't understand, and what should we say instead?
I have the opportunity to work with so many different partners, and you get to see that there's very similar words across the board.
Mhm.
And I know that Kristin has those specifically to her institution as well. There's a secret language in higher ed. It's matriculate, bursar, registrar, verification. All of those are just baked into our system. And we just forget they're not normal, but they might as well just be in a different language for some families. And one example I have is from a partner of mine that sometimes it's not even the big words. Two that tripped people up at this institution for high school seniors and their families was undergraduate and graduate. So they had the opportunity to start their application, but they had to choose an undergraduate application or a graduate one. And they told me that they had so many seniors selecting the graduate application because they've graduated. I mean, you really can't blame them, right? I mean, that's really solid logic. No notes, right? But the problem is that obviously they need to start an undergraduate application. And so I think sometimes it's even those simple terms that can cause confusion that are just really baked into who we are in higher ed, but isn't very clear for the student.
What one comes to mind for you, Kristin?
Oh, matriculate. We use it all the time. I think that that's the worst offender, right? And students don't really understand that what matriculation is. They just know that they want to go to college and they want to be on a campus somewhere, and they don't understand that they need to matriculate by a certain date or what that even means. Another one is cohort. They really aren't sure what the heck that means and why that's relevant to their academics. MCLA is proud to say that we are one of the top social mobility colleges in the United States, according to U.S. News and World Report. And we wear that with a badge of pride. But, you know, the undergraduate, the prospective student, we have to define what social mobility is. They don't really understand that. So we make sure that we're very clear when we promote that accolade, that it just means that they're going to be better off than previous generations that came before them, and that it's really an empowering message. But if you just leave it at the accolade without an explanation, you're really missing the point. And who are you speaking to at the end of the day?
Yeah. A similar one that I've been seeing is this idea of college attainment. And we're trying to talk to audiences who might not be considering college, and we're using terms like college attainment. It's out of sync for what we're actually trying to do and connect with these different audiences.
Yeah, for sure.
I would hesitate to not mention financial aid communication, right? I mean, I think from top to bottom, we have challenges when it comes to understanding financial aid. And even I think our offices on our campuses, I think that's something we also don't think about very often. I came from an institution where we had some very unique office names that did not make it clear what was done at that institution. Yeah. And we found ourselves explaining that as often as we did, you know, our typical jargon that we had in higher education.
Well, and then throw in sometimes there's a donor name attached to the office or something too, which absolutely means nothing to a prospective student or their parents. So you guys talk a lot about clarity. So why is clarity more than just a best practice?
Because I think that in higher ed, we like to use flowery language to make us sound academic, puff out our chests a little bit. But at the end of the day, especially for an institution like mine, when 43% of our students are first generation, we need to understand that the average age is, 18 years old that we're speaking to, is their parents haven't done this before. And we need to use plain language that we use in conversation every day. If we want to attain these students, have them come to our campuses, and not only have them come to our campuses, but empower them to feel like they belong there, that they're smart enough to be there, then let's just go ahead and use the language that everyone's using throughout this country and world every day. We're not using flowery words on a regular basis when we speak to people in conversation.
How do you think that when we're not clear, or when it feels like there's a barrier because there's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding, how does that lead to mistrust? Not just misunderstanding, but also mistrust. What's that connection?
So my background, I was trained as a journalist. I went to journalism school, and that means early on you really learn about the reader, and that the reader can be anyone, right? It can be the CEO, or it can be the person delivering their lunch. And the point is that everyone deserves to understand the story. And I think that that's what clarity does in higher ed, is it levels the playing field. So whether your audience is first generation or a family with a long line of college grads, they both start with equal access to understanding. And so I think clarity isn't really a best practice. It's just really equity, but it's an action. When we write clearly, we're not lowering the bar, we're opening a door. And there's a lot of ways in which, if you are creating a barrier, that is going to then lead to mistrust. And I think sometimes it's also small things that add up. For me, I am a communications and marketing person. And so it's not having a reply email address, broken links, forms that don't explain why they're asking information, tone. I think tone is really important. Students can get one tone from admissions, one from financial aid, one from housing, and it's like talking to multiple institutions. And the thing is, we're in education. We should be the world leaders in communication, and yet half of our messaging sounds like they're
Don't we
written by
say
ancient
that's
committees.
the thing? Don't we say that that's one of the top things we develop in our students is those communication skills for the workplace?
100%.
Yes.
And trust doesn't break all at once. I think it just leaks out it's very slow. But when I think about the messages that we're sending, it's either a deposit or a withdrawal kind of from their trust bank. It's not necessarily trust eroding all at once. It's just these simple things that add up over time.
And not consciously necessarily, but it's how you're making someone feel over time.
It's death by a thousand cuts, right? So you have this prospective student who is genuinely, and their family who are genuinely excited about your institution. And then there's a little pause about something that they absorbed. And then there's another pause. And by the time they go through that whole entire admission cycle and then throw financial aid on top of it and have them try to decode all of those financial messages, at some point you risk putting the message in their head that they don't belong at your institution, or my biggest fear, that you're telling them they're not smart enough to go there. And that is something where game over. They feel stupid now, and they're not stupid.
They feel like they don't belong.
That's exactly it. You've lost them. You've completely lost them. And that's the unfortunate thing that we need to avoid.
So the stakes are high.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I've had institutions that I worked with ask me, does it really matter that much? Is it really necessary? And the analogy I like to use is, I was straight out of undergrad, and I had the opportunity to go to Paris, France. So there's, little old me, Eastern Kentucky, Southern accent, walking into like a Paris restaurant, not knowing French, right? I only know Spanish, right? I was going with a couple of friends, and you walk in and everyone else seems to know what to order. You're sitting there thinking like, do I just order frites because it's like the only thing I understand on this menu? And I think that's how first-gen families can feel sometimes, is embarrassed to ask the question, or Immediately, if when I was in that situation, I'm like, I'm just going to leave because I feel like I don't belong here and I'm embarrassing myself. When I think of that analogy, it's, everyone else seems fluent in college and they're just trying to survive getting through the menu. That's kind of the analogy I try to give and how important it is because it does lead to belonging. We may not think that sometimes words matter that much, but it really does.
Listen, I don't even like going to a restaurant if I don't know what the parking situation is going to be. Right? I like to have that clarity and that understanding, let alone go into a restaurant where I'm not going to know what to order or speak the language.
Mm-hmm.
People like to understand and they like to know, they like to have clarity around what's happening.
Absolutely.
So tell me, what do we do about this? What are your methods or your tools to evaluate if a message is clear? Because it's hard when you're the writer, especially, right? To check yourself on if this is going to be clear to all types of audiences that you're trying to reach.
Laura and I were meant to meet, and we had a great time preparing this presentation for AMA in November. But she was coming at it from a different area than me, and we kind of put our heads together and said, how do we make this work? So from my side of things, I went straight to the students at MCLA. We have a high first-gen population, high Pell eligible population. And I went into the classrooms and I just started spitting out words to them. Do you know what this means? And not everyone in that class was first gen, but a lot of them were. And it was clear to me what they understood and what they didn't understand. So Laura and I kind of developed this bank of phrases and words that we wanted to decode. And that really became the starting point for the playbook that Laura developed. And I want to be clear that she is the champion of that playbook. And we worked on it together, but it was her idea. And just put in the student voices and their perspectives, and then built an AI tool to further help people so that we can make sure that we cross every T and dot every I before something goes out the door that we're sending to prospective families.
From my perspective, I'm a consultant now and I have the opportunity to work with many institutions, but I don't necessarily have direct access like Kristin does. And so she was able to give us that perspective. But I think, there's still ways that you can evaluate if your message is clear. And for me, I read it out loud. And if I can't say it naturally and it seem conversational, then clearly it needs a rewrite. And second, I give it to someone who doesn't work in higher ed. So a spouse, a friend, my mom, another teenager that might be in your family, and just say like, what is this asking you to do? Can you tell me very clearly? And if there's any hesitation there, I think that tells you that isn't ready.
You're not there yet. Yeah.
Right. And there's other tools out there, right? I think of Hemingway. That's an app, Grammarly, obviously. But I think nothing can really beat a real human. And having that review one-on-one with them in whatever way it can be, even if you don't have access to students, is really important.
We have done this with financial aid letters. Someone who doesn't work, tell me what you think your cost is going to be. Tell me what you think your financial aid is. So I think that idea is so powerful in this context as well. But what I like about the solution that you all found is that it's human and AI.
Yes.
Right?
So
tell me how you use the human insight to set up the AI piece to make it scale for yourselves.
It isn't one or the other. It's a mixture of both, but also kind of making a persona for our AI tool that is, we said we want this to be at the 6th grade reading level. This is meant to be digestible. Here's who we're trying to reach, and gave them really information about the student audiences that we serve so that the tool could serve writers across institutions and beyond what they needed to make sure it was as clear as possible. But then you also want to have that conversation. Does this really make sense? Go to the student, go to a colleague, et cetera, to make sure that AI is clear.
If someone's listening and they want to get started on this, where should they start? Is it a type of content? So is it you should go audit your emails, your website, your print, or is it types of content or themes of content? What would you advise?
I did this a little bit when I started at MCLA, and I think it's going to be different based on your institution and the biggest stressors. But taking a look at overall, I started with the web because that made the most sense for MCLA, is to take a look at what is our web content looking like? How is somebody using this? Is it easy to navigate? Are we telling the stories correctly? Are we telling them just in real plain language? And the answer that I was coming up with was, no, we're not doing that. So last February, we went and started a web project where we didn't do an overhaul of ncla.edu, but we enhanced the main web page and the front door of the institution from a digital standpoint, added in more storytelling based on our key market differentiators, but went in and embedded things with real student voices. And this was not edited. This was students talking about their personal experiences at MCLA and then matching the content on the website to match what they said in the videos. So we know that students want more content in video form and short video form. And that was quite a successful undertaking for MCLA. So for me, that's where we started. But we didn't do that alone. We did it in tandem with our content mapping and our content in Slate.
Yeah, for me, I think a lot of my partners start with email and website. The two touch points, I think, that are also the front doors to you as an institution for prospective students and families. And I think email is kind of where it tends to collapse first. And often it is the first touch point, even before the website, especially if you have a big prospect pool and you purchased a lot of names and they may be hearing from you for the first time, then email might be their first touch. Too many details, no context, jargon, and then moving to your website, because almost every email has a call to action. And where's it leading? It's leading to your website next. And particularly your admissions and your financial aid pages. I would also venture to say your major pages, because we know that the main website, your front page is not always the first link that is clicked, especially now with ChatGPT, right? With AI and even going through Google, they may say, what's the best pre-health school in X state? They may be coming through your major pages first. And so I would say if you're looking at your website, those areas are going to be really important, where clarity can really immediately change access. And then from that point, I would say moving on to things like print pieces, forms, and anything else that's going to kind of touch the student along their journey.
Do you have any examples of before and after? So before, and then we've thought through this kind of process around clarity in our language and our messaging, and after, what does that look like?
We implemented a new search strategy this year, and without sharing numbers, I can tell you that the conversion has nearly doubled because of what we have done. And we took a look at what are we doing and how are we communicating in email, and then how can we build this kind of sub-search campaign around it. So it was 2 print touch points with 5 emails to see how we could convert. We did it later, which was a little scary for us. It was a fall launch, which I know sounds very late, but we know our audience. We know that they're not necessarily going to be early applicants. And that was something that has worked well. So we're seeing almost a 50% improvement on gains from that. But the language right there was clear. It was crystal clear. And also not just the language, but the visuals were crystal clear. It was very readable. And the conversion is the proof in that.
What would you say a campaign like that looked like before you applied this framework to it, Kristin?
We had 1 small postcard print piece and 5 emails that weren't tailored to the value propositions and to kind of alpha gen / Gen Z cusp that we're on. So we really said we are now talking to 2 generations that are similar, but there are some differences there and nuances. How do we meet them? How do we get the value props in there? How do we make it more visual? Because we know that visual descriptions are powerful and keep the content digestible, but always linking it back to our value props. And then we drove them to that beautiful new website, which just further enriched the process. And that was another reason why we waited, is we really wanted the new mcla.edu to be launched so that when we drove people from the QR code to the website, it was this seamless, beautiful kind of like, yes, this makes sense. There was no disjointment there.
You really threaded that needle really well from what I'm hearing, Kristin, because I think the reservation around this a lot of time is we still want to talk about our institution. So you don't want to go so far that you're only talking about like maybe what the audience wants to hear about, because there's still things you need to convey about your institution. So it sounds like you've been able to balance this idea of the value proposition, but just making it more understandable, more clear, and in messaging that can be received by the audience.
We're trying.
Well,
Did
it's a
you hear-
moving target. It's not like it can ever be perfect, right?
No,
And this
and,
kind
and
of
we're
thing.
we're doing market research right now that will validate that what we're doing is either working or not. But we feel it and we see it in the numbers. So it is, it's the key. What are the key differentiators? But it is that balance between the value props and what the student wants. And then really just, I know we're saying this to death, so apologies for everyone who's sick of hearing it, but meeting students where they are. What do they want to hear? Let them figure out why they want to come to an institution. They will figure that out. They're smart. They know what they want, but giving them, setting that up for them correctly so that they can find it. That's really difficult. And you have to be fluid enough to adapt when the time calls for it, but always have this overall brand messaging and value proposition as your North Star, even when you pivot.
What would you say to someone who's listening and they buy into this idea, but they're feeling overwhelmed by the work that comes with it?
I think it's small steps, right? And I think that's the most important thing here. One of the things when I talk about the importance of clarity around first gen communication is that it's not just a win for first gen, it's a win for everybody. And it requires no budget. And I think that's also a big win, right? There's few things in higher ed now that can give you really great gains, like what Kristin just talked about. That is just making simple changes in the way that you communicate rather than purchasing a new software or buying a new product with a vendor. It shows up in two directions too. For Kristin, she saw increases in things, but I think sometimes the most important wins are reductions. I know for me and my experience at my last institution is we had a lot of confusion around onboarding students when it came to the summertime, right? Because there's a lot of institutions, I'm sure we weren't the only one, where there are multiple offices sending emails and communication.
And we're getting into that very higher ed centric language.
Yep. Yeah. And not everyone is writing the same way or have the same tone. And so then the students just get confused. So what do? They call their admissions counselor. They call the admissions office. You're trying to get them there to call Student Life because they are the ones who have the answers. And so what we did is we created an anti-melt and onboarding campaign for the summer where we introduced every office, what they do in plain language, the people by name who they need to reach out to. And it resulted in fewer phone calls, fewer missteps along the way, a higher increase in completion of forms for enrollment. So really the win for us was we took something off our plate and we were able to transition them to these offices and making them feel like more of a part of campus in the summertime than having them kind of continue to be attached to enrollment for all of their admissions questions and all their enrollment questions.
And these things are free. You're not going to the president asking for more budget in your marketing to market more. This is just, yes, it can feel overwhelming and people can freeze because of that, but start small. This is laundry. It's never done. It's never done. So you have to start in one corner and just move on to the next and kind of work with your peers, work with your supervisors to say, where should we start? How can we bucket this so that it doesn't feel overwhelming? But it was a year ago that we were having conversations about our financial aid package and how can we make it easier to understand. And this vision of a car lot kept popping in my head. When you go to a local dealership to look at cars, everything is mapped out on the window of the car. You know what the entire sticker price of that car is and how it's broken down. And then they will give you an idea of here's what your monthly payment's going to be if you finance it for 5 years or et cetera. So everyone has a budget. We need to make sure that whatever we're delivering to the admitted student and their families, that they understand how they're going to be able to plug that in their budget. Or if they have to borrow money, which obviously most do, what's that going to mean in 10 years, 20 years? How is that going to set them up for success and not failure? So we really just decided to just start printing the total amount at the top of the financial aid package and then broke it down from there and said, here is exactly how that breaks down, but this is the total price. We didn't spend any money to do that. We just got around a table as leaders in enrollment and marketing and financial aid and said, how the heck do we do this? And last year we were up, and we weren't up drastically, but we were up, and we did not spend any more. We were just being smarter about how we communicate financial aid.
Well, I think the point you just made, Kristin, is that it's free, but also strategic.
Yeah.
So you don't find a lot of things that are both. But by the way, if you need help, we have consultants and helpers like Laura to bring in. So you also don't have to do it. You don't have to do it on your own either.
And I think too, the way that we are working with students and parents, we talk a lot about how it's all about the student and we're student centered. And that's a term we use a lot in higher education. If we're not thinking about how it resonates with the student, or if the student can understand it, then we're not being really as student-centered as we think that we are. Another thing that's free is what we've mentioned before, which is ask your own students. You have access to tour guides and ambassadors and people who can read these things for you for free as well. And so sometimes it's also not just the work of yourself. Use those that you have access to help do that for you. I remember having a financial aid package that I sent over to 2 of my senior ambassadors. I managed our campus visit team. They just tore it apart, which was fantastic because it also pointed out a couple of things to me that were challenging. And part of our presentation this year, we kind of formatted around the fact that these past 2 years, I was a family college counselor for my niece and nephew for the past 2 years. And I had saved every text message and every email from that experience. And so I got to see where those biggest hiccups were in the process. And that whole experience was free for me to be able to just get a little bit of insight to what they're challenged with, the jargon that we're using that maybe isn't very clear, and questions that maybe you don't think about that they're asking around something that may seem very obvious or simple to you. Having friends, family members, people who are going through this process to ask those questions to.
Oh, yes. I love when I have a colleague or a family member or a friend going through the college search process. It's so helpful. We just have to have a thicker skin sometimes, because especially when you ask those students, I'm going to tell you, you're not always going to like what the student's got to say. So just be ready for it. You can't have that sort of like pride of ownership. You got to be ready to receive that feedback. Well, thank you both for being on the podcast. And if you're listening, I think all 3 of us would like to hear if you've had any of these jargon to plain language transformations. We'd love to hear what your example is. But thank you both, Laura and Kristin, for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
And make sure to share this episode with a colleague and get everyone on the same page, thinking about your audience first when you're doing your communications.